So maybe we can imagine this for the center of Pavila. This is a theater made with scaffolding, only scaffolding and boards. Tongji and boards last. This is mano d'opera italiana.
Please. That is, if I am a cruise ship, cruise, and I pronounce it is maybe not that precise. Cruise ship designer. And
cruise ship?
Yes, cruise ship.
Cruise ship.
Yes. And one day I was filled with a wonderful idea that is, why not enlarge the floor in the ship? And I practiced. So maybe I will get the same result with almost the same result with you. So my question is that, as an architect, what is your experience of building this hall, and what is that advantage of the architect? I mean, if I am the designer, I maybe make the bottom of the ship more thin, so makes it that seems not like a ship, more architectural.
Well, I think if I understand correctly, working for the poor, is that what you said? Working for?
Yes, as an architect, what's the difference?
Between working for rich people and poor people?
No. What's the difference of the ship designers? That's some industrial design.
Right. I don't know really. Cruise ships are very strange because a cruise ship is more a building than a ship. It's like a 20-story building with I don't know how many rooms. So you go and you see the images in Venice where one of the cruise ships comes into Venice, and it's like two different worlds. Venice is tiny and the cruise ship is big. I don't know the technical difference between an industrial designer, a shipbuilder, etc. But you're an architect, yes? And you want to be an architect. So you have tools to use. The technical part is very easy, I think. They're easy. You learn technique, you study technique, you adapt technique. That's easy. There are two very hard things. Choosing what you want to do as an architect, and two, getting it built. The technical part is enough that's really the least problematic. The most important thing is to decide what kind of architect am I going to be. That you can struggle with for many, many, many years. You can always learn technique, but for me, the idea of choosing who to work for and what you will make, because unless you live to 200 years old, and maybe you will, but I won't, you have a very short period of time to do good work. You have to learn. The most important thing to learn is who you are as an architect. Everything else is easy in comparison. That's what I suppose.
past, you emphasized that gateways leading to the courtyards are very long, like 30 meters, yes? And why you did it so long? Because nowadays ships can be very close to the bank of the river. Why they so long? What's wrong?
Why do you think?
Maybe to let people see the ship.
Well, my interest, that's a very good question, was to pull the barge away so that the walking, the 30 meters from here to there, was a procession that allowed you to leave the world that you knew and go to a different world. If it was a short distance, there's not enough time to change the way you think or to imagine. And also the idea of walking over water. One of the beautiful things about the pool, and something I didn't realize until I swam in the pool, is that it's a very strange experience to swim surrounded by water. You're surrounded by light, and then you're floating in the pool. And it feels like a very otherworldly, ethereal sensation that was very magical. It was there was a reason people came. They didn't know why, but floating in a basin of light was a very mystical kind of feeling. It was not what a normal swimming pool is when it's built on the land.
I have a question about what influence did the outdoor music have on your visual design?
That's a great question. I mean, you can probably see in the website that a lot of my work is very reduced and relatively simple. But I don't think the connection is as strong stylistically as it is ideologically. I think what I took from Rossi most of all was this connection between the city and the building, between the tessuto urbana, the fabric of the city, and the monuments of the city. And it's really the idea that the city is a laboratory for architects. You don't make an object in the city, you make a building that makes sense of the city. That is, you make a building in Milano, it's about the typology, or should be about the typology of Milano, not the typology of Seattle, Washington. And so as we see now, there are many architects, I'm sure there are celebrities, and they're very famous, and a lot of students love them, who do the same building no matter where they build, because their reference is internal. I think the reference for an architect is the city. And I think you in the course that you're taking here, in the interventions that you make in Milano, it's very important to understand the fabric of Milano in order to understand how to make good social spaces in Milano. So, for that reason, Rossi obviously had a great impression on me in this way of reducing to very simple forms. But I also take projects that have very, very small budgets. So I don't have a choice. I have to do simple things. And that is, I think, ultimately why I was attracted to Aldo, is because I was attracted to, first, his beautiful paintings and the idea, the Chirico idea of heavy shadows and a kind of emotional memory of the city and of a personal experience. I think that's really ultimately what the connection is. Yeah.
How much is that such as the floating pool and the city statue design, and I think all these things can encourage the social life and to encourage the the public space life in the city.
Mhm.
So could you tell me more about the rules of the society, of the methods that will come out the ideas to build all these things to combine with the historical cities such as in Italy or in some other buildings already in that era, and you build these things to combine perfectly with all the buildings already in that.
Are you asking about?
There's building already in that era, and you build such a stage and the folding walls that come to that era, but it's just combined perfectly with the buildings already in there.
Well, I don't know if it combines perfectly. I would say that every intervention that we make and that you would make as an architect needs to embody the discourse between building now and what came before, maybe what will become in the future. But each building is a way of seeing the city and understanding the city. And when people in the 80s talked about contextualism, and you had people like Philip Johnson saying, well, this building has the cornice, and I'm taking the cornice and bringing it across, et cetera, et cetera. That, I think, was an architecture of the moment. But my feeling is always that, for example, if you see some of the housing that we've done, there's the next building to one side of us is 2 stories. Our building is 5 stories. My answer for that would be the building that is 2 stories will one day also be 5 stories because the density of the area will always go up. And therefore, you need to also design for the future. So if I was a contextualist, I would say, oh, no, my building has to be 2 stories because the neighbor is 2 stories. But as someone saying, I'm making an intervention in a city that will always be changing and always be growing, you cannot allow your immediate neighbor to dictate how you're going to build your building. And also, I think it's fair to say that each building in itself has an idea that even though it's understood in the larger condition of the city, it still needs to be true to itself. So it doesn't need to look like a neighbor to be a piece of the city. But it's a very important question for architects. How do you take history and incorporate it in your building without mimicking the building? And I think that's where your teachers will be very helpful in understanding typology, which is not style. It's really about the way a building is organized or the historical precedents for why a building is the way it is. Why is a courtyard a certain size? To get light in because there's always the circulation around the edge. Many different reasons, but things evolve for an architectural reason, and that's why studying typology will give you a much better idea of how things have been continuous through time.
Question. As we were understanding, I think the amazing point of the floating pool sent us is one, the experience, either you walk or swim around the pool. The second is record the memory of the people of the old times. Then my question is, I think it will be much cheaper to build to dig a pool just near the bank deck. Just near the deck, it has not has to be a boat on a boat. Is floating important to the idea, or is just a personal taste?
Great question. So I have an interesting rebuttal. It would seem like it's cheaper to build a pool on land. But in New York City, as you know, and probably in Shanghai, land is very expensive. I don't know what the weather is like in Shanghai, but in New York, We swim for 2 months a year. 2 out of 12, maybe 3. June, July, and August. A little bit of September. So the swimming season for the public pools really runs from the end of June to the beginning of September, 2.5 months, and then it's finished. If you build a pool on very expensive land and you only use the pool 2.5 months out of the year, it's crazy. It makes no economic sense. The pool can be moved around. It doesn't take up real estate. We had hoped at the beginning, which is why I like this question, that when it's winter in New York, we were going to take the pool back down to Florida or Louisiana and go back and forth all year long using the pool when it's warm. As it turns out, they have a lot of pools already in Florida. And in New Orleans, after Katrina, we thought this would be a great gift to the children of New Orleans. It turns out they don't swim in the winter in New Orleans because it's a little too cold. So it turns out that when we finish with our season, we move the pool to a boatyard, it gets painted, it gets worked on, and then it moves back. So in the end, it is cheaper. But then one more part. Yes, it is a personal, so sometimes reality and personality can come together. I would not have designed a pool. I always wanted to do a project that was floating. As you can see, I still want to do a project that's floating, trying to do the theater. So obviously also from Aldo Rossi from the Teatro del Mondo, this idea of a temporary architecture, an architecture that appears and then disappears, like the circus. I remember as a child the circus coming to my little town, and it was the first time I'd experienced something that was not permanent. My school was permanent, my house was permanent, the store was permanent. The circus came for 1 week and then left. I was heartbroken, completely heartbroken. But if you read what Rossi writes, also about the seasons and about August and the beauty and the sadness when the summer is finished and you have to go back to school or you have to go back to work. So the idea of a temporary architecture is very beautiful and very evocative because it doesn't always stay there. And so my obsession with the temporary extends to the pool, which is why I allowed the firm to suffer for 7 years. Otherwise, there are lots of architects who would have said, 7, I don't have the money to wait for 7 years. I don't have the interest. How can anything take 7 years? For me, it was what I always wanted to do. So 7 years. What's 7 years? It's 7, just 7 years. So, but that's a good question. Yes?
Excuse me, sir. Why did you not use glass at the bottom of the pool?
These are the best questions I've ever had. So, we are using glass in the #2 pool that we're designing now. And one of the reasons that we're using glass is because the agency that gives us the permit to use the rivers for our pools said that it was important to let light down into the river so that the fish could survive. They were very upset if we were going to build, now we're building an Olympic-sized pool, twice as big as this, and they were very concerned that it would create a shadow that would be bad for the fish. We're not so sure that a shadow is bad for the fish, because sometimes they want shadow. But in any case, we said, fine, you want a glass bottom, we'll do a glass bottom. So now, the idea of making this pool with a glass bottom, we're imagining that the fish underneath will be looking up at the human being swimming. And, the mama fish will say to the little fish, don't bang on the glass and disturb the human beings that are swimming. Anyway, very expensive, but now, as opposed to 2003, much more doable. We're working with Arab engineers, and they have basically designed a glass bottom with some structure, obviously, and we think that it should be very interesting. A very different pool from this pool. All right, you had great questions. It's a successful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
So actually, I know that you are fine tonight, so probably I ask some of our guys to guide you through Pavia. That would be great. To see some of the very important features that you already know and that also for you are very useful in the urban tissue, because Pavia, as you know, is one of the most studied places in the 70s about the relationship between the monuments and the housing inside of the town. And so we make a little break, and after the break with the students, we make the introduce yourself session. So as we don't know each other, we ask them to introduce themselves through their project. So we change the position and we listen to you. And if you can already move all of your documents here, and then we can start.